We are now moving on to pre-painting your prosthetic. If you want your application to be fast on site, then you need to pre-paint it for sure. For this section, we are going to use acrylic paint, which we're going to mix with liquid prosade to make a type of paint called packs. We will also need a plastic cup with alcohol and some brushes. The first thing we're going to do is remove the flashing. Now, while we are doing that, I want to remind you that pre-painting is optional. You can paint your prosthetics after you apply it too, with just some Ben Nye makeup. But for LARP, I would definitely recommend it, as it will save you a significant amount of time on site. You might also notice that I have two sets of prosthetics here. The light pink is a set made from our prosthetic transfer material, while the darker set is made using primarily prosade cream. The only real difference is the light pink one has Cabasil to thicken it, while the prosade cream obviously does not, because prosade cream is already thick. So you can see the Cabasil makes the prosthetic quite a bit more opaque. Unless I found out if you leave it in the dehydrator for maybe like 2 days, then it'll get transparent. I don't know why that is, but that's true. The next thing I'm going to do is put the smaller prosthetics on a white background. Then take a flat, maybe angled brush and dip it in alcohol to dissolve the edges of the prosthetic a little bit. You really want to get it as close to the sculpted edge as possible without biting into the edge too much. And you're just going to do that all the way around. Alright, so once you have your edges nice and close, you're going to want to gently dab it off with a rag because alcohol activates the prosade and that will make it sticky again. So you want to make sure you remove the alcohol completely from the prosthetic. It looks like we are now ready to paint. I'm going to start with a nice warm reptilian green. To do this, I'm going to use a combination of Liquitex and golden paints. But the brand isn't important as long as you use a high pigment paint, so any of your higher quality acrylic paints will be fine. Make sure you keep track of which paints you're using. Now, since we are making lizard scales, I'm going to start out with a lighter green. Like applying makeup to your face, you want to try and start off with a color as close to nude as possible, then go in and focus on your darks and highlights. I'm going to add some liquid prosade into a container cap and then mix it with some of my paint. You're going to have to mix prosade in order to get the paint to adhere to the prosthetic. This mixture of prosade and acrylic paint is actually called Pax paint. Cosplayers have a tendency to just use it straight on their skin because it stays all day, but that's really, really bad for your skin. If you keep watching Larp House, I will show you a better way to paint your skin so that it stays all day, but please don't use Pax just straight on your skin. So now we're going to start in the middle. And for these particular appliances, we're going to want to fade it into the color of the skin. So I'm being really careful about blending it so that the outer edges are still the flesh tone. You can get pretty close, and you do want it to be thin and not too opaque. But that is just for more realism. If you're following along and you have the light pink prosthetics like the ones we sell, you're going to want to stretch your paint all the way to the edge or use makeup to blend it. Eventually we will add more highlights and texture. But for the first coat, you are just going to want to tint it to get your base color down. It can be a bit heavier towards the middle, but we really want it to have nice and soft edges. Acrylic paint also dries darker than it looks when it's wet, and it's double true with the prosade mixture. This is because prosade starts out white and dries clear. Also remember, since we are using Prosthetic in our paints, if you need to clean your brush, you can dip it in a cup of alcohol instead of water. I'm going to add a little bit more white for our second coat. Now I have a tendency to mix too much paint, and that's just my style. But if you happen to mix too much paint and have a spare tiny tub, you should try to store some for later use. It's always better to save materials when you can. Okay, we are mixed and ready to go, so let's begin our second layer. With each new layer, we are going to use a little less of the Prosthetic and give us a more opaque color. This works because our previous layer acts as a primer for our PAX paint to stick to. I tend to use my finger as a blending tool. It works well for me, but your hands can get a little bit sticky. What also works is having a brush with no pigment in it if you don't want to use your fingers. This mixture is getting a little bit minty for me, so I'm going to add some more yellow. Generally speaking, you should never just add white to a paint if you want to lighten something up. Consider the tone you're going for and add yellow or blue or purple or whatever until you get the desired color. It helps to know how light works a little bit. If you add just white, it's going to make it look dead and flat. If you don't want to use these on your cheeks and forehead, you can try attaching them to other body parts like your shoulders or forearms or on the back of your hand. You might even try extending the look by having dark lines extending from the edges along your chosen body part. This is where you will really see the benefit of pre-painting, since applying these will only take about 10 minutes on site. You will have more time to add those extra details. So let's clean our brush and alcohol and pop these in the dehydrator for about 15 minutes. It's been about 15 minutes, so let's begin our next coat. It's always a good idea to rotate your piece and make sure you're getting everywhere you want to get. So our painting job looks good. Let's pop these back in the dehydrator for 15 more minutes before we begin our detail work. Okay, everything looks good, so let's begin that detail work. I'm going to start with a small paintbrush about the size of an eyeliner makeup brush. And we're going to want to add some cool colors for depth. So let's add some blue to go in between our scales. I'm also going to use my finger and a larger flat brush without any paint for blending. As we paint, we want to create darker colors towards where there would be shadows, obviously. But if you find you're getting too much paint on your brush, you can try and attempt to spread it around those shadow areas. I'm going to eventually paint the area around the ridges completely in, but for now I'm going to focus on the rest of the scales. You can see that by adding this shadow detail, we've already added a lot of depth to our prosthetics. The next thing I'm going to do is back over the scales and check to make sure that I have clean edges. It's always a good idea to check and make sure you have clean edges. So we've got a pretty good basic like mid-tone here. Let's just do the same thing to these. So now I'm going in with the dark darks. So we're going to use a bit of yellow and brown to contrast the cool colors and make it look more black without the deadening effect that black has, unless you're going for like a film noir look or something. If you want, you can extend the brown shadows off past the scales a little bit to give the illusion of it blending into the skin. Time to add highlights. Let's begin by adding Liquitex iridescent gold to our green paint and create a green tinted gold. We can lighten it up a little bit with yellow. Next, begin adding small amounts of it to the tips of the scales. Try and focus on the larger portions to the center and then blend out from there. Slight difference between this one and this one. This one doesn't have highlights on it yet, and this one does. It's subtle, but worth it. You can see how I continued some of the darks off to give the illusion that the scales are blending into the flesh. But I'm not going to carry the highlights out to the edge. You really need to learn to artistically curate your detail work. I mean, if you're going for perfect realism, then sure, do detail work till you friggin' pass out. But I mean, we're painting dragon scales on our face. Let's everybody just calm down. The next bit I'm going to do is entirely optional. I am going to add the tiniest touch of straight gold, and that is because I am going to do these ridges in gold and I want it to carry through. Once this dries, it will be like true gold. I'm only going to do it where the highlights are, but I think I'm also going to bring the gold out to the edges. That is because I've decided these gold speckles are dragon freckles, and dragons should be glittery. A side benefit of this is that it should be easier to blend into your face with makeup. Just add some gold speckles to your face and it should help smooth the transition. Just don't put acrylic paint directly on your face. You can already see that they're drying here and adding a really nice sparkle Before we start painting our ridges in gold, we are going to want to put down a slightly darker color first. Shimmery pigments tend to be best used to show off highlighted areas rather than highlighting them themselves. It's time to pop them back in the dehydrator for another 15 minutes. Now that the paint is dry, let's add a slightly lighter coat without covering the base. We want to have a darker color clearly visible at the bottom. And that is pre-painting Prosthetic transfers. Let's stick that in the dehydrator for a bit until it's totally dry.